at the train of plague victims shambling through the winding, cramped streets. They waded through makeshift open sewers and piles of trash, past stacks of bodies and burning piles of refuse. The refugees made the signs of some native superstition as they passed, calling to be protected against the disease carried by the procession of the damned. The damned themselves were shrouded in grave vestments, taken from the few refugees to have a proper burial, stained with corpse liquor, their feet bound with rags, and their faces covered in hoods, with nothing but torn eye holes for features. About 20 of them were making their way through the camp, picking up new members as they went, seeking out somewhere out of the way and uninhabited to die. The disease rotted the insides, leaving organs of foul decaying mush, and it left the lungs a heaving pulpy mass of writhing worms, and it shriveled the brain, and caused the spine to heat up and burn out the victim's back. It drove them mad too, and catatonic all at once. The disease itself had been the clue. Everyone knew what it did, but everyone knew something different. Each man and woman ascribed to the disease whatever fate themselves feared most. If they feared going mad, it was how the plague killed. If they were religious, it was a moral disease that took hold through impure thoughts and killed by mimicking the wounds of saints. If they had family and friends, then the disease spread like a fire between close-knit groups. There was no one truth, no one consistency. That was what suggested to Orphos there was no disease, or rather there was no plague. There were plenty of diseases brought by inadequate water supply and cramped living conditions, but those were all the same. They could be described and treated by Medicaid officers accompanied by units of Imperial Guard who watched the camp's population through the sights of a lasgun. But the plague was different. The plague was a fiction. Orphos rolled to the edge of the hadblock roof, keeping his chameleon cloak wrapped around him. He could see now the path the plague victim procession was taking, toward the northwestern corner of the camp, in a winding path that kept them away from the high guard towers manned by Imperial Guard snipers, and through the concentrations of most hostile refugees. The belief that the plague was a deliberate Imperial creation was widespread, and the procession was viewed as a display of martyrdom by those refugees who hated the Imperium, a fact which did more than anything to keep Imperial scrutiny away from the shambling doomed figures. Orphos knew he could not be completely invisible. He hid where he could, and when he could not, he went by night and let his silhouette stand out against the sky. The people believed that an Imperial killer was stalking through them, eliminating those who spoke out against the Imperium. Orphos was certain he had been assumed the perpetrator of countless deaths and murders in the camp already. It was a legend that suited him. As long as he kept a different distance between himself and the procession, the fiction was useful, because it meant no one would approach him. People fled their houses and murmured prayers of protection and would not interfere. If the plague was an invention, why had it been invented? Were these 24 people who were now trudging through pools of fuel-tainted mud, taking their miserable journey to maintain the illusion that the Imperium had infected them? No. Some of them were genuine victims of the disease who joined the procession as it went. But Orphos kept account and noted that those who joined soon disappeared, vanishing in the shadows of the darkest streets. And the same core of plague victims continued. For such a deadly disease, the Emperor's embrace plague did not seem to have killed those who had been walking with it for 2 days. The plague story was supposed to keep people away, to ensure safe passage through the camp, and provide an excuse to shield the walkers' faces. Orphos could have been willing to wager that the masks did not hide plague scars or hollow dying eyes. This is how the traitors were moving themselves out of the camp, westwards towards the escape into the mountains that bounded the battle plains. No one stopped them, no one got close. Those who joined them suffered unquestionable deaths. The disguise was perfect. This was how the King of Crows was making his way to freedom. The jungle of the Devolian coil was a great sickle of emerald, reaching into a glittering ocean, shone beneath the sanctifier so brightly it might have been painted. 400 kilometers south, and an entire ocean away from Kazeo, the second front for the Battle of Opus was opening up far above ground, between the wispy clouds and the bright green canopies of the jungle. The Devolian coil itself, a long curved peninsula, notched with coves and inlets between sheer chasms of granite cliffs, had been the center of an empire ruled by the Devolian Navarchs. Once they had vied with Kazeo for dominion of the planet. The coil and the city that served it, the metropolis of Rebka, were home to ancient martial traditions that never died when the Devolian Empire fell. For centuries, the Navarchs, now absorbed into the structure of the Aristia, had maintained their fleets and splendid armies, as they had always done. Now the silken-sailed warships and grand parades were mostly for show. But that naval prowess that had developed into a mastery of flight and aerial warfare that the Aristia had encouraged. The fruits of that obsession, first with the sea, and now with the sky, streaked up from a hidden airfield, beneath the canopy, lighting up with warning runes on the Sanctifier's cockpit. "Heathen forces! 11 o'clock below us, 5 kilometers!" said Cabriones, scanning rapidly through the various tactical readouts in front of him. "Approaching fast! Mach .4. "I see them," said Gorgithian calmly. 5 bogies he counted in an instant, and they were out of view, hurtling past the Sanctifier. Gorgithian gauged their speed and maneuverability as he turned the gunship onto their tails. They were small, fast, probably more aerobatic, at least at high speeds, than the gunship. In the brief glimpse he had, they looked like single-seater fighters, probably dedicated interceptors, with a loadout of cannon and air-to-air missiles. "Dangerous in swarms," he said. "Does 5 count as a swarm?" asked Cabriones, barely registering the conversation, as he ran through the many tactical views developing on his pick screens. "Not quite," said Gorgithian. The enemy were still in formation, arcing upwards and turning as they did so, showing the shining purple and white of their upper hull designs. There was little need, evidently, to camouflage the fighters on the ground when they had the cover of the jungle canopy. Instead, they proudly wore the colors of their squadron, or noble house, that paid for them, just as the Sanctifier wore the heraldry of the Imperial Fists. "Auspex on my mark," said Cabriones. Gorgithian aimed the Sanctifier down, as if to dive low and skim along the canopy. He wanted the enemy to think he was running. He wanted them to be grinning behind their oxygen masks, wagering one another who would win the chase. "Mark!" said Cabriones. At that moment, the enemy had reached the apex of their climb and aimed down, diving towards the Sanctifier. Eager to get the name of the kill, they launched their missiles almost as one, as soon as the gunship was in their sights. Lock-ons barely registered before missile launch warnings blared all over the cockpit. Gorgithian focused on a retinal rune and silenced them. "Primus away!" he said, and a flickering arm and release switch was activated. One of the fragmentation bombs, with which the Sanctifier was loaded, dropped out of the weapons bay. Its fuse was short, far too short for safety. But the first lesson Gorgithian had learned in battle was that one does not win a dogfight being safe. The bomb exploded in the tree canopy. A great fountain of shredded wood shrapnel burst in a dark hemisphere just behind the gunship. Suddenly, overwhelmed with potential targets, the missile streaked into a debris cloud and exploded. Sharp, blue-white bursts of radiation and flame impacting the jungle. In the chaos and heat, the enemy fighters would be blinded, masked by the smoke and heat radiation. The Sanctifier turned rather more quickly than a fighter could, its slow speed suddenly a virtue. By the time the fighters passed overhead, Gorgithian's thumb was already on the firing stud. "Feast, Sanctifier!" he yelled as the fighters roared past the gunship. They could not see the gunship, but the gunship's machine spirit, ancient and cunning, could see them. The Sanctifier growled with hunger. Gorgithian had to rein it in for a second more, until his vision was full of the blue-white exhaust of the fighters rocketing past. Gorgithian ordered the launch, and the belly of the Sanctifier blazed with fire. 5 missiles burst out their housings and arrowed upwards, the archaeotep of the gunship's cogitator calculating millions of angles and velocities per second. The interlocking contrails of each missile created a burning spiral in the sky, caging the rearmost fighter, even as the first missile ripped up through the rear edge of its right wing and blew it apart. Explosions stuttered overhead. 3 of the fighters were destroyed in the air, creating an expanding call of burning debris. A 4th missile sheared a chunk out of its target's tail, and the fighter fell away, flipping onto one side and tumbling towards the canopy. It plunged through the mantle of leaves, and a split second later, a column of fire and black smoke punched up in the air. The 5th missile missed. The Sanctifier howled in frustration, and its engines leapt. Gorgithian wrestled the yoke back, and kept the gunship on the fighter's tail, as it looped back up to escape. "Do we have the speed?" said Kibriones. "His engine's flaring," replied Gorgithian. "He sucked it in too. Too much debris." The fighter's exhaust was sputtering, yellow shooting through blue flame. The pilot was climbing and dropping to keep up airspeed. The Sanctifier followed in a straight line, keeping pace with the faster fighter. "Rend, Sanctifier! Bring out your talons!" Gorgithian switched to the nose-mounted assault cannon, and the swinging reticule lit up on the view screen. Gorgithian fired, and sprays of silver lashed out towards the enemy. The enemy pilot was good. He kept the fighter moving in all places, and only a few shots found their mark. A shower of burning metallic countermeasures sprayed out from the fighter's weapons bay, the view screen shuddering with static as they deflected the mundane sensor of the Sanctifier. But the gunship's archaeotech included sensors that could see through anything the enemy might throw. The coughing of the engines, as Gorgithian forced them to maximum, sounded like a deep mocking laughter. Another burst of cannon fire kicked a spatter of black specks from the rear of the fighter. It was already hurt. It would not take much more to destroy it. Below, the jungle clung to the hills and valleys, creating a landscape that rose and fell like waves of a great ocean. Spurs of rock broke the canopy, curved and gnarled like old fingers, arranged in clutches to form great stone cages. The fighter ducked through one, and the Sanctifier whipped to one side to avoid it, buying the enemy pilot a half-second of distance over its pursuer. Another cannon burst. This one missed, blowing the top knuckle off a stone finger. One more shot. One more good burst, and the enemy would fall. A lash of blue-white energy whipped up from behind the jungle canopy. It cut through the fighter so rapidly it was gone before Gorgithian's eye could properly register what happened. The fighter did not explode. It fell apart, bisected at an angle, through the center of its fuselage, spilling components as the 2 parts fell as dead weight into the canopy below. "What was that?" said Gorgithian. "No bogies in range," replied Kibriones. "It's blinded the sensors. That output was massive. It's an energy weapon." "Damnation! There isn't anything like that on this planet," said Gorgithian, wrenching the Sanctifier around to avoid the area where the fighter had gone down. "Must be on the ground," said Kibriones. Gorgithian could see the black tear in the jungle where the weapon had discharged. The trees were burning. Ahead, columns of crackling blue energy punched into the sky, pulses of electricity shuddering through the canopy. Half a dozen of them were suddenly burning ahead of the Sanctifier. "They're everywhere," said Kibriones. "Behind us, too. We've flown in the middle of it." "Whatever it is," said Gorgithian. He pulled the Sanctifier between pillars of energy. With the sensor still blinded, he had to do it by eye. The runes on the view screen were blinking in and out, and the instrument readings were spinning haywire. Crackles of power were playing across the surfaces of the cockpit, jumping between the cables overhead. One of the pick screens in front of Kebriones cracked, spilling sparks over the Imperial fist. They were almost out. A few hundred meters further and the energy field ended, giving way to an expansive jungle, and beyond that, the ocean. The Sanctifier bucked wildly. Air was suddenly shrieking through the cockpit. Gorgithian glanced back, and in that fraction of a second noted the cockpit door had been blown out to reveal a huge section of the gunship's rear torn away. To the back of the Sanctifier, he could see the vivid blue sky and the green of the jungle hurtling by. Gorgithian tested the controls. He still had command, though they were sluggish and feeble. "I'm bringing us down!" he shouted over the howl of the wind. This time Gorgithian saw the lash of energy coiling up towards him. It sliced just to one side of the gunship, and he saw the Sanctifier's left wing ripped off, tumbling away from the craft. The gunship fell to one side, as if rolling off a cliff, and the canopy was rushing up towards Gorgithian's face. He braced himself. The only thought he had as he fell was this was the only Shadowhawk in service, and if it was not recovered from the jungle floor, there would never be any more. The Sanctifier hit the canopy. The last thing Gorgithian saw was a branch spearing through the view screen, impaling Kebriones through the throat and exiting through the back of his head. Then the world spun around him, and blackness fell. Then Gorgithian felt nothing. Lysander kicked his way through another wall of dry mud and human bones, and the gloom of his enhanced sight picked out the walls of skulls staring back at him. "I like this not," said Brother Stinter. "You like nothing," replied Brother Barros. It was Barros who had taken up the flamer of fallen Brother Apollonos, and he held the weapon in front of him now, the flame flickering at its tip. Apollonos' name was inscribed in the weapon's casing. Barros' lightning claw was clamped to the backpack of his armor. "The enemy must fight us toe-to-toe down here. We see him dying. We smell him burning. What is there not to like?" The catacombs beneath Rebka were cramped and noisome. They would be close enough for normal soldiers, but the Imperial Fist barely crouched over the corridors, lined with burial niches. Miniature chapels at the junctions were decorated with domes and skulls, and pillars of femurs, and underfoot the earth grave gave way into older graves, with bones that disappeared into dust under their armored feet. Lysander's fire team made good speed, as they could through the labyrinth, reading from Sergeant Kirav's auspex. "They watch," said Stinter. "They seek to surround us." "If they attack us from behind, we will just turn around," said Barros. "Let them come to us. I challenge them to try their hand. Slaves of the dark gods, here is meat for you. Just lever us open and take it. Stay focused, brethren," snapped Kirav. His face lit pale green as he read from the auspex. "We are the first. We are Imperial Fists." "How close are we?" said Lysander. 500 meters, said Kirav. "Oh, Calgon," voxed Lysander. He was greeted only with static over the vox channel. "Curse these catacombs," he said. "Something is blocking the vox traffic." "There!" hissed Thinter, peering down a side passage too narrow for a man to move without turning sideways. "Your imagination is your biggest enemy," said Barros. "We have trouble enough down here without—" Stinter's bolter opened up, filling the close confines with strobing light and noise. Spindly shapes squirmed away down the passage, slick, silvery flesh illuminated in the gunfire. "Watch the rear!" yelled Kirav. Stinter kept firing, churning up the walls of the passage. Clumps of dirt and shattered bones showered down. Brother Mort's crouched and turned, watching the passageway behind the Imperial Fist with the storm bolter leveled. Lysander saw the creature flit out of view. Stinter's eyes were good. It would not do to let these things get away. Lysander raised his shield in front of him and charged toward the wall, gauging the angle of the thing's movement. He powered forward into the wall and through it, the compacted earth giving way in front of him. He burst into the space beyond and kept running, the massive weight of his Terminator armor careening through the labyrinth walls. He burst into an open space. The floor was stone, and an altar stood in the center of it, with the image of a sun carved into its lid. On the altar squatted the enemy, and Lysander saw, it might only generously be described as human. Its torso was grossly elongated, resembling the body of a thick muscular snake. Its skin was like that of a fish, scaled and silver. Its long arms and legs had too many joints, and its feet had spindly fingers in the place of toes. Its face was long, and its features almost vestigial, with twin slits for a nose, and narrow, sunken eyes. Its mouth opened. Lysander glimpsed a bundle of bony spines in the place of a tongue. Its eyes flared green, and gills down the sides of its sinuous torso fluttered open. Lysander held his shield, and dropped to one knee, as the thing spat a hail of bone at him. The shards were propelled with such force they punched through, their points sticking to the inside of the shield. Lysander powered off his back leg, and slammed into the creature, pinning it to the altar with his shield. The creature writhed and hissed. Lysander could see nothing human remaining in its face. Whoever it had once been, he was long gone. Lysander raised the fist of Dorn over his head, and brought it straight down to the thing's face. Its skull was crushed flat after a second, and it stopped thrashing about beneath him. More of them were slithering around, just visible, crawling rapidly along the ceiling and walls. Passageways radiated off from the altar room, and the enemy seeming to close in, forming a noose around it, and tightening. Barrows leapt into the room, vaulting over the altar, and letting the flamers spit a tremendous gout of flame down one corridor. The skeletons in their niches were blasted to ash, and Lysander could just see the creatures writhing there, stripped to their mutated skeletons by the intensity of the heat. The ruination behind Lysander, the rough metal formed by his charge, Brother Stinter wrestled with another. The thing had its body coiled around him. Stinter stunned it with a strike from the butt of his bolter, then drew his combat knife and slit a long, wet wound along its belly. The thing thrashed as its organs spilled out to the dirt. As he rolled back into his feet, Brother Mortz moved towards him, walking backwards, Stormbolter spitting out bursts of fire. They were everywhere. They crawled from the walls and ceiling, scaly hands reaching up from behind flagstones. "Close in and bring the rage, my brethren!" yelled Lysander. In his Terminator armor, he was like a walking fortification, a linchpin of the battlefield around which his fire team gathered, as if he were to tower over them. Mutants slithered towards them from every angle, and were shot down by bolter fire, their long bodies split open and entrails spilling everywhere. Those that weathered the storm were slashed into bloody ribbons by lightning claw and combat knife, or slammed into the ground by the fist of Dorn. For a moment they relented. Either their numbers were expended, or they were regrouping to attack anew. "What damnable thing summoned these vermin?" spat Barrows. "Every abomination on this planet spawns its own breed of lackey." "We are close," said Stinter, "for it to break its followers against us. Or it is stupid," said Barrows. He was met with a deep rumbling, shuddering the whole catacomb. Clods of earth and old bones fell from the walls. Lysander crouched down instinctively, waiting for the next attack to strike home. Darkness swarmed towards him, with the sound of crashing wave, It rushed over the corridors and battered against Lysander's shield and a wall of pure black. It was ink, a sea of ink, pouring through the catacombs. "It knows we are here," yelled Lysander. "Now is the time to close. Forward, brethren, forward!" Lysander forced himself onwards through the surging tide. The ink was already waist deep to a space marine. "Up!" shouted Stentor over the rushing tide. "We have to go up!" Lysander realized Stentor was right. The ink was rising too fast. A space marine in full armor could fight underwater, but even his enhanced senses could not see enough to fight beneath the surface here. Lysander slammed his shield up into the ceiling, and the earth showered down around him, the skull and femurs of disturbed burials clattering against his shoulder guards. He opened up a higher level of the catacombs, one that had perhaps not been disturbed since it had been filled with bodies and sealed. Lysander could see the walls encrusted with bone above him. He hauled himself up through the hole and scrambled up to the upper level, reaching down to haul a battle brother after him. The ink was still rising, a great torrent of it emptying into the catacombs, and soon it would breach this level too. The fire team made it out of the lower level, and Lysander led them on, shouldering through what walls stood in his way, the bones of generations of Opus's dead crunching to dust beneath his feet. Ahead was a tall, solid this time. Ahead was a wall, solid this time, a part of a massive foundation, sunk deep to the earth of Rebka. "Make ready to breach!" ordered Lysander, as the Imperial fists stacked up alongside him. He saw their armor was smeared black from foot to shoulder. Lysander swung the fist of Dorn into the wall. The power field discharged with a sound like a lightning bolt, and the stone blocks of the wall crumbled. The stagnant, ancient air of the catacombs was replaced by the stench of something rotting, like the desiccated heart of something vast and dead. Ahead, the sealed wing of the Temple of Muses, Rebka's most secret and well-guarded place. Here were the family records of the Aristia, their bloodlines and their secrets. Everyone who claimed membership of the Aristia had to find proof here, among the sublines and usurpers who had turned the questions of inheritance and legitimacy into a labyrinth. A whole caste of Rebka's citizens were trained to research the families of the Aristia, to answer the hundreds of claims and counterclaims made every year. Most of the caste members were impaled, flayed and bloody, on glistening chains, strung along the ceiling of the cavernous sealed wing. Their skins had been fashioned into banners, upon which were carved red runes that squirmed and migrated, tumbling through one another, to form an infinite variety of obscene curses in the tongues of the warp. The bookcases that ran from floor to ceiling were half empty, their contents heaped up across the floor. Thousands upon thousands of books had been thrown out, and those that remained on the shelves were changed. They shuddered and growled, covers pulsing like cocoons of some insect. The books lying open at Lysander's feet were blank. Their words had been bled out to feed the great pool in the center of the sealed wing, in which squatted the foulest thing he had yet seen on Opus. The pool was full of black ink, drained from the enormous totality of knowledge kept in the Temple of Muses. Half submerged in it was the creature the Imperial intelligence had tentatively identified as Scarcrave, sometimes known as the Black Sun, sometimes the Drinker of Thoughts. Scarcrave resembled nothing so much as a vast, half-developed fetus from the wound of some enormous, roughly humanoid alien. Its swollen cranium pulsed with dark veins, loaded with stolen knowledge, and its wide, flat eyes were solid pools of bluish energy. The rest of its face seemed barely stretched onto its skull, and its bent, feeble torso and vestigial arms suggested what made it terrible was not any physical prowess, but whatever contained within that misshapen skull. Scarcrave, the Black Sun, was a Skylvor, an eater of knowledge. The ink in which it bathed carried the information stolen from the Temple of Muses, and was absorbing every word, every secret of the Aristia. The servants of Scarcrave the serpentine mutants, which had attacked the Imperial Fist in the catacombs, writhed through the ink, or in the remains of shredded books that formed drifts of stained pages at the edges of the sealed wing. They raised a hissing, shrieking din at the sight of Lysander, striking through the broken wall, and swarmed over the massive body of Scarcrave, yelping warnings to its half-formed ears. Scarcrave's watery eyes turned towards Lysander. Lysander could feel the weight of its psychic interrogation as it sought a way into his mind. It felt like a great dark hand was crushing his consciousness, but his soul did not give. There were few minds in the galaxy that could break a spirit like Lysander's. "Onwards!" shouted Lysander. "These will taste the wrath of Dorn!" Lysander charged. He trusted his battle brothers to take care of Scarcrave's attendants. He had to kill the moral threat before its psychic powers overwhelmed him. Speed and shock were his weapons here. He could not falter or pause, for the little information the Imperial forces had on Scarcrave emphasized the sheer scale of his mental abilities. Lysander vaulted a heap of gutted books and battered aside the mutant who reared up at him with a swipe of his shield. "You are Lysander," said Scarcrave, the deep, crystal-clear voice resonating through the inside of his skull. "Out of my mind!" yelled Lysander in response. Another few steps closer. He could see one of Scarcrave's spindly hands raised. "What could I tell you, Captain Lysander, of why I am here?" Scarcrave's eyes flared. Blood-stained spiked chains erupted from the floor in front of Lysander, aimed to impale and entangle. Lysander dropped to one knee and rolled, snapping the chains under his shield. He leapt over another, even as a gout of fire from Barros's flamer ripped over a handful of mutants, scrambling out of the black pool towards him. "I care not! I care only that you die!" shouted Lysander. "Would that I could give you their names, Lysander, so you might peel open page by page and tear their secrets from them," continued Scarcrave. His voice was calm and unmoved. Even the bolter fire exploded around him. Lysander was in Scarcrave's shadow now. The floor beneath him split open to the great fanged mouth. Lysander leapt, hitting chest first into the lip opposite, feet kicking out over nothing. The mouths ground shut, and Lysander scrambled out of it, rolling away from the teeth as they gnashed close underneath him. "But I am bound, Imperial Fist. Ancient pacts are called upon, and under them I only serve. My silence is compelled, under pain of annihilation. And silence is all you will know," shouted Lysander, "when I throw you back to the warp." "So many have promised," said Scarcrave. "Not yet have they delivered." Tentacles black and rubbery extruded themselves from the inky pool in front of Lysander. The first captain ripped through them with a swing of his hammer. One wrapped around his leg, and he kicked 3, tearing the tentacle off at the root. It sprayed ink as it thrashed around, and Lysander planted a foot on the edge of the pool, ready to leap. "Such secrets I have," said Scarcrave. "I pray to my gods that I could tell you." "I said, be gone from my mind!" Lysander leapt at Scarcrave. He covered the distance across the pool, and thudded into Scarcrave's enormous body. The monster's rubbery flesh gave underneath his fingernails, and tore handholds to climb up onto its shoulders. Around the sealed wing, the Imperial fists were butchering the mutants who attended on Scarcrave. Stentor slammed the head of one into a bookshelf, splintering its skull. Mortz's Stormbolter cut down another 2 as they slithered along the walls. They had bought Lysander his chance. They had rewarded his trust. Now he had to repay it, for they trusted him to finish this. Lysander raised the Fist of Dorn. "You want to know," said Scarcrave. "I can tell you. Spare me, free me. All your questions will be answered." Lysander's answer came in the form of the Fist of Dorn, arcing downwards, power field blazing blue-white as it fell. The hammer crunched into Scarcrave's skull, and the power field blew its head apart. Lysander fell back to the shower of bone and brain. Scarcrave's death cry was a long and terrible scream. 1,000 voices pouring out of its fractured mind, as all the secrets it had devoured poured out of the great gale of information. The whole sealed wing shook, the scholars' bodies falling from their walls, books raining down. Lysander hit the floor. Scarcrave's body stayed above him, fountaining gore from its caved-in skull. It toppled to one side, and the silence that fell was the signal that it was dead. Lysander got to his feet and shook his head to throw off the worst of the gore. A few bolter shots sounded as Brother Stentor put down the last of the mutants, the last resistance, dying as it thrashed out in the death throes. "I heard it," said Kirev. "It spoke of secrets. What did it mean?" "Heed not its lies," said Lysander. He switched to the Vox. "Ukulgan, do you hear me, brother?" "I hear, Captain," came Ukulgan's voice, distorted but recognizable over the Vox. "Resistance was heavy, but it falters." "Scarcrave is destroyed," said Lysander. "Meet us at the Muse's altar." "It shall be so, Captain." Lysander led the fire team to the wreckage of the sealed wing. Already Scarcrave's body was collapsing, as if decaying at some accelerated speed. Through the archway, flanked with statues of Aristea's scholar lords, the rest of the Temple of the Muses opened up. It was strewn with detritus of battle, dozens of bodies lying heaped up beneath the makeshift barricades of overturned tables and the piles of smoldering books they had defended. Among them, Lysander recognized the gray and black camouflage fatigues of the Sabatian penal legions. The enemy here were not so dramatically mutated as those in the sealed wing. They resembled the militia reported all over Kazael, a mix of household troops and compelled citizens, armed with anything they could find in the armories of the Aristia. Knots of surviving Sabatians stood, heads bowed, as they heard the prayers of the preachers who had accompanied them to battle. The prayers included the code phases that controlled the combat drug injectors implanted in each trooper's throat. And now the Temple of Muses was one. The injectors were flooding them with sedatives, reining their instincts to kill. The temple was mostly given over to museum and library wings, where the Aristia stored their knowledge and the artifacts of their history, but it was also a place of worship, built on the site where offerings were left to the deities of Opus's past. Those remembered in the current reincarnation of the temple were gods and goddesses of creation, art, heredity, and nobility, and their images looked down from the stained glass that flanked the 3 walls of the altar chapel that nested in one corner of the temple. It had been defended by 2 ranks of Sabatians, relatively well-disciplined penal soldiers, who had mown down the dozens of militia whose bodies littered the approach to the chapel. Even with their drug injectors keeping them calm, there was no doubting the fear and a little anger in their eyes as they saw the Imperial fists walking through the devastation to the chapel. "Champion of the Emperor," said Lysander as he saw Ukulgan approaching for the chapel. Squad Sesvian was with him, a unit from the 2nd Company, who had been given the task by Lysander of supporting the Imperial assaults on Repka. Lysander's own fire team went among them, and the Imperial fists congratulated one another that the enemy in the Temple of Muses was broken, and Scarcrave was dead. "It is good it was us to break this place," said Ukulgan. "The Guard will soon fortify it and turn it into their forward base in this area. We might not have the opportunity to recover any evidence then." "Then let us do so now," said Lysander. "Many men died here," said Ukulgan. "We could have it fought over sooner or later, but it was our word that saw it assaulted when its defenders were still at full strength. This Sarek woman's information better be worth it. If it is not, she will never leave Opus. I think she knows that." The altar at the back of the chapel was a stone block covered with symbols of various arts: quills, actors' masks, draughtsmen's tools, and paintbrushes. Lysander knelt before it and examined the lid, on which the Aristia had been accustomed to leave offerings of gold and artworks before the war had come to Opus. "Captain," said Ukulgan, "could there be secrets on this world to uncover that are not to anyone's benefit?" "Quite possibly," said Lysander. "Many secrets bring only suffering, but that does not mean the truth should go on being hidden. The truth has its own justification." Lysander leveled the top off the altar. The stone slab came away, revealing the hollowed-out interior of the altar, in which was a small decorated box. Lysander picked up the box. It seemed tiny and delicate in his armored hand. "This is it," he said. "This is what Sarek hid here before she was caught. This is proof." Lysander carefully opened the box. Inside was a single bullet. Lysander held the bullet close to his eye. "What is this?" asked Okulgan. "I shall have to ask Sarek for confirmation," said Lysander, "but I suspect it is the bullet that killed Inspector Kedtrips." "Captain," came a voice over the box. "Sesfin here. The guard snipers are reporting a large enemy concentration, moving along the canals to our north. They wish to make a proper fight of this place, it seems." "What reinforcements have we en route?" replied Lysander. He took the bullet back in the box and pocketed it in one of the ammo pouches on his waist. 5,000 Delusions, came the reply. "On their way from the Basilica Prime, and the landing zone is established in the parade ground east of here, so the Navy should give us support from the air." "Then we will hold," said Lysander. He closed the box and turned to face the two squads of Imperial Fists at the chapel entrance. "Brothers, hear your commander. We have struck a blow, and the enemy is reeling. They are angry, and their rage will lash out at us for revenge. But we have with us the guns of the Imperial Fists, and the blade of the Emperor's own champion. Then let the enemy come. We will bleed Rebka white, and when the traitors around us can fight no more, we will hunt down their leaders, and do to them what we did to Scarcrave. Prepare defenses. Break down your zones of fire. This place will withstand as if its foundations were laid by Dorn itself." Sergeant Sesfin and Kirav began organizing the Imperial Fists, sending the battle brothers in twos and threes to cover the approaches to the temple. The Sabatian preachers began their order sermons, and the cogs of battle began to turn again. The killing was not yet done. "What is happening on this world?" asked Ukulgan. "Truly, Lysander, what is happening?" "See the questions aside, Ukulgan, and don't let Dorn's ways of battle replace them. When the killing lets up, then we will find the answers." Already, Lysander could hear the chanting from the canals, thousands of voices, raised in celebration of dark powers who had infiltrated their world. He could hear the engines of the distant vehicles the Delusions were driving too, and the distant screams of fighter bombers overhead. Another battle, one of 100 opening up on Opus. Behind it all lay a pattern, maddening and elusive, that might stop the fighting or make it 100 times worse. That would all have to wait until the Temple of Muses was quiet again.